Well, hello and welcome once again to the DCL podcast, where we're inviting you to sit back, relax, and we'll be on our way shortly. Well, welcome back to the DCL podcast, and I'm excited to go back down to Florida, and welcome back to the show, Frank from Jacksonville. How are you doing today, Frank?
I'm doing well, Steve. Thank you.
Thanks for coming back on. It was a pleasure talking to you last time, and as we were talking last time, I knew that you had a couple different cruises coming up, and as it turned out, you had one come up that wasn't quite planned, right?
Yeah, actually, two that weren't planned.
Two.
In both cases, we had friends of ours, a different set of friends who were on these separate cruises, and they called us and said, "Hey, they've just released discounted rates. You guys should come on this cruise with us." And so that's what we ended up doing in both cases.
And both of these were on the Fantasy 7-Day Eastern Caribbean, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
And being in Florida, and I think we talked about this last time, you guys really take advantage of those Florida residency rates, and that was what happened on this one? Are these?
It did for one of them, and then for the other one, it was one of the sort of guaranteed rates. So I would assume that both of those cases were not selling as well as they wanted to, and so they released those. So with the one with the Florida resident rate, we were actually able to select our cabin. The other one, we basically was luck of the draw, but worked out fine. Okay. And have
you done that before, the guaranteed staterooms?
Yeah, I think this is the second or third time we've done that, and I've really never had any particular problem with it. We're not real picky about where we end up, so it wasn't too bad.
And once again, kind of to explain it to everybody, that's an option. And you see it seems like you see it as the cruise gets closer. You can't book it right away, can you? When they first
right. This one we actually booked, I think it was like 4 or 5 weeks before the cruise, so it was pretty close. And what we were able to do was pick the category. So they had inside rooms available and ocean view rooms available. And we picked ocean view. And then I think we got our cabin assignment a couple of weeks later. And again, it was perfectly fine.
Okay, so they send that to you before you get to the port?
Usually they do. I can imagine there may be situations where you sort of show up and they say this is where you're going, but as far as I know, they try to get them to you ahead of time.
Okay, and have you ever, I'm just going all different angles here. Once you get that room, have you ever tried to call them up and finagle something else if it wasn't something that you liked, or is that a possibility, or is it kind of you get what you get?
I think my understanding is if you agree to that rate, then you get what you get. And when you get to the port, you can see if they have anything else available. But otherwise, I think you're locked into whatever it is that they assign you.
Okay. Well, great. I've seen those opportunities available, but we haven't done it ourselves yet. So that's good to know. Well, I thought this would be kind of fun. We've been so much on the last couple months talking about Alaska and in Europe, several different Mediterranean, transatlantic, that and really most of the sailings that Disney does is really done in the Caribbean. And I thought it'd be kind of neat to kind of refocus back down there. So I thought this would be a great opportunity for you to come on and kind of get us refocused on the Caribbean and talk about your experiences down there.
Sure, that'd be great.
Well, let's talk about getting down to Port Canaveral. Both of these left out of Port Canaveral. And how do you guys you guys live in Jacksonville. Do you drive down the day of, or do you ever stay down in Port Canaveral itself?
For Port Canaveral, it's about a 2-hour drive for us, so we generally drive down day of. That tends to work out pretty well.
Okay, and then do you use the parking garage that they have there, or what do you guys usually do?
Yeah, so it's a really nice setup. I mean, we've cruised out of a number of ports with Disney, and the nice thing about Port Canaveral is they really have their own dedicated terminal, and there's a parking garage that really is just pretty much for the Disney ships, either the Dream or the Fantasy, that are sailing out of port down there. And so it's typically works the way it works is you sort of go in and they have security guards there that are really mainly to sort of point you in the right direction. So if you have luggage you need to drop off, they send you to a certain point where you can drop your luggage off with the porters, and then they direct you to the parking garage. And they have both a parking garage and surface parking. With Port Canaveral, you pay as you go in, so they know what the length of the cruise is that's leaving that day, and so that's what you pay for. The interesting thing is if you're doing a back-to-back cruise, you only end up having to pay for parking for the first cruise of that because that's all they're collecting for. So the second 7-night cruise that we went on, we talked to some folks who had been on the previous cruise, which was a 3-night cruise, And so they were on the ship for 10 days, but only had to pay for 3 days of parking, which I guess is a nice little perk. But the nice thing about it is then when it's time to leave after the cruise, you just go out to your car, put your stuff in, and go. You don't have to wait in line to pay to get out of the parking garage or anything like that.
No, that's perfect, actually. It's definitely it's better that they do it that way, isn't it?
I think so.
Well, let's talk a little bit about embarkation out of Port Canaveral. You guys have been on several different cruises, and I was wondering if you could share maybe some of your thoughts and strategies about embarkation, because I know, and it was just something I guess you and I were talking about before we started recording, that some of the other ports where the Disney ships leave out of, like San Diego, maybe some of the ports in Europe, there's a lot of things to do within the cities themselves the day the cruise leaves. So I think a lot of people tend to spend some of that time visiting those cities or having some experiences there before they get on the ship, whereas Port Canaveral, it seems like that's the main focus, getting on the ship. So it's a little bit busier, it seems like, from what I've heard.
Yeah, I think some of that probably depends on what time you get there, but you're right. There's not a lot to do in the area like there might be in some larger cities. And so some of it, I think, depends on what your port arrival time is once you've either selected or been assigned. Usually we have the earliest port arrival time that we can get because it's pretty easy for us to get there. And so generally when we get down there, at least when we're getting there, pulling in, parking, et cetera, it isn't really too crowded yet. We get there like around 10:30 in the morning, which is when they open, and things are not too bad. But I think as the morning goes on, things tend to get busier and busier and busier with people driving in. And then the other piece is the folks that are coming in from Orlando that are taking the bus from the airport or coming from perhaps spending a few days at Walt Disney World or something like that start to filter in. So it starts to get more and more crowded. And then the other bottleneck seems to be when they first start boarding the ship. So depending on, I guess, how the morning has gone with them getting the ship for the next group of people coming on, we've gotten on the ship as early as 11:15. We've gotten on ships as late as 12:30. And obviously the later that goes, the more people you have stacking up in the terminal sort of waiting to get on the ship. They do actually have 2 separate security entrances to go through, so they're able to spread out that part of the crowd a little bit more. So if you look at the way it's set up, the parking garage actually connects to the terminal through covered walkways. One of them is on the ground and one of them is on the 3rd floor. And so you can take either one of those, and there's security stations at each of those to go through. So it's nice to have more than one choice for the security lines, and I think that helps a little bit. But then again, you can get, once everybody gets in the terminal and people are ready to get on the ship, if that gets delayed, then it can really get pretty busy in there. But they try to do things to keep people entertained. They always have a character or two down there taking pictures with folks, and they have some really cool models of the ships down there that you can look at, and some other things to try to do. But there's really not a lot of seating, so most people end up sort of standing around, milling around, waiting for their group to be called.
As you know, there's nothing you can do with it being delayed. It just is. It is what it is. But yeah, definitely some good strategies there. So that's good to know that there's 2 different lines, one upstairs and one downstairs, as far as getting in through security as well. So do you guys usually go through the one upstairs or downstairs, or have you noticed any difference between the 2?
It sort of depends on when we get there and where we park. We had an interesting experience on our cruise in May because I actually had to work that morning, and I didn't get off of work until about 11 o'clock. And so we didn't get down to the port until about 1:30 or so, which is a lot later than we usually get there. And the garage was a good bit fuller. We actually had to park up on the 4th floor. And at that point, they only had one of the security lines open, which was the one down on the ground floor. But usually what we do if we get there early is we park on the 3rd floor and we walk straight across into that 3rd floor security, and then sort of right through from there.
Well, let's talk about the 2 different cruises then, and we'll start with the one in May. And what were your guys' overall thoughts about the first one on the Fantasy in May?
We had a great time. We were cruising with friends of ours, but it was actually one of, I think, our a little bit more disappointing cruises in terms of just some things that didn't go as well as they could have. And these are the sort of things that can happen. There were some issues related to dining that actually were somewhat problematic. There were some issues with some of the port excursions, especially in St. Martin. And I think that was more because St. Martin is still sort of recovering from the hurricane, and they didn't really have everything up and running as well as perhaps it was portrayed that it would be. And then for whatever reason, we had a lot of trouble on that cruise sort of figuring out when to do certain activities, and the times really didn't seem to fit into when we wanted to do things. And then the cruise we took in July, all of that stuff was completely the opposite, and we had probably one of the best cruises we've ever had, but same ship, same itinerary.
Well, I guess let's just talk about, we'll start with the not so good, and then we'll go to the good, and we'll start with that May one. Let's start with the dining then. Our family hasn't been on the bigger ships, and we've talked before. I know that you guys are like Paolo and Remy. Did you spend time in Paolo and Remy this time, or did you guys, with your friends, mainly eat in the main dining rooms?
We mainly ate in the main dining rooms. We did one dinner in Remy, which actually was fantastic, as it always is, and we did Apollo brunch, which was also really good. Problems that we had actually were mostly in the main dining room, and it was really an unfortunate situation, I think. We had a situation where we were at a table for the four of us, and that was great. But next to us, with the same set of servers, was a table that had, I think, about 8 or 10 people, and those folks turned out to be, as best I could tell, the most demanding people that have ever been on a Disney cruise ship. And it became a situation where our serving team, the head server, pretty much everybody was going crazy trying to keep everything going for those folks. And unfortunately, that led to a situation, for example, where we had one evening in Enchanted Garden where we placed an order and an hour later still didn't have any food.
Wow. In a situation like that makes it tough because, as you said, the head server's involved in it as well. So where do you have to turn, really, I guess? What did the...
Yeah, I mean, we talked to the head server and, tried to see if we could figure out what was going on. They were pretty tight-lipped about... And I don't know whether this was a table of VIPs or what was going on, but they were pretty tight-lipped about the whole thing. Things did get a little bit better after that, and it wasn't our serving team, and they were working as hard as they could, and they were doing the best they could. But in retrospect, I just wonder if it was a situation where they might have tried to pull in some more help from somewhere else if they possibly could, because it was clear that they were kind of overwhelmed with what they were needing to do.
Once you're kind of in a situation like that where you see that night in, night out as you're going to the main dining, you're kind of limited on your choices. Did you guys think about going to Cabanas and eating for the evening? Or I'm sure like Paolo and Remy would have been tough to rebook then at that time. And unfortunately, I mean, it's sad that you would have to go to those lengths to try and have a good experience.
I think we just went with it. And part of that is because the folks that we were cruising with, this was only their second Disney cruise, and they were really wanting to see the main dining rooms and have those experiences, the Drawn to Animation night where you get to do the drawing stuff in Animator's Palette and some of the other things that happen in the main dining rooms. So again, we tried to make the best of it. It wasn't like we were in a hurry to get anywhere after dinner, but when you've got late seating and your appetizer's not coming until after 9 o'clock, that's not the greatest situation.
Right. And so is that kind of what caused you the problems as far as like timing wise, kind of threw you off as far as being able to do some of the other things on the ship that you wanted to do?
I think it may have. But the other thing that I couldn't quite figure out is usually the way things are scheduled, you can look at when the main shows are, you can look at when some of the other shows are in places like the Tube and things like that, and they seem to fit into the schedule in some sort of natural order, but it really didn't seem to work out that way. And then again, as you said, some of the late night adult stuff we just weren't able to make it to. Or for one example, we actually got to one in the Tube about 5 minutes before it was going to start, and at that point it was standing room only, so there was really no chance for us to see what was going on. So what we actually ended up doing is we played a ton of trivia, and I actually had a really good time with that. Won a couple of times and really had a lot of fun, but there seemed to be no end to trivia opportunities, so that was sort of our trivia cruise, and we had a really good time with that, so that was good.
You got to look at it, take the glass half full and say, well, it kind of forced us into doing some things that we don't always do, and had some different experiences.
Yeah.
Did you guys do any of the shows on board this time, since this was your friend's second time, and what were their thoughts?
We did.
That?
So the first night on that cruise, but not on the subsequent cruise, they did their sort of opening night. I think it's called A Fantasy Come True. It's sort of a variety show, and they talk about what the different acts are that are going to be there during that cruise. We saw Aladdin because we really love that show, and our friends did as well. There was a magician that we saw. There was a ventriloquist that we saw, and those were good shows as well. And then the big thing for the cruise, which was really funny because they kept teasing it but never promised it until it happened, was Solo premiered while we were on that cruise. And so on the first night, the cruise director said, well, if you're really lucky, we might be able to show Solo when it opens at the end of the week. But it never showed up in any of the navigators. There's the online navigator that has all the activities for the full cruise. It never showed up in there until the day of. And then they said, guess what? We're showing Solo. And they showed it several times that night and the next day. So we got to see that as well on the premiere, and that's a lot of fun too.
When they do a premiere like that, do they do anything special besides just showing it? Do they kind of I don't know, do they have merchandise that they sell or giveaways or anything like that? Or
they had Solo merchandise in the shops, and they actually had that through the whole cruise. So, we knew that was a good sign. But other than that, it was scheduled. But they showed it both in the large Walt Disney Theater and also in the Buena Vista Theater, which is the movie theater. So it didn't premiere until, I think, Thursday evening of the cruise. So they showed it a couple of times Thursday evening, and then Friday, which was the Castaway Cay Day, they showed it throughout the day and the evening as well. So there were enough opportunities for people to be able to see it.
Okay. And what were your thoughts on it? Are you a Star Wars fan?
Yeah, I really am. And so was a friend that I was cruising with. So actually our wives went to bed because we went to the 11:30 showing that Thursday night. And my wife seen it subsequently. But yeah, we enjoyed it. We thought it was a good movie. I actually thought Donald Glover, who played Lando Calrissian as a young man, was fantastic. If you close your eyes at points, you could hear Billy D. Williams coming out of his mouth. It was just fantastic.
Definitely. I really enjoyed it too. I know it's got some detractors out there, but I really enjoyed it too. So, what a neat experience to be able to watch that on a ship as it premieres too.
Yeah, that was great.
So, well, let's talk about Remy again. You're one of the few people that I know that's had the opportunity to dine in Remy. Could you talk a little bit about why you like to dine up there, or why you and your wife like dining up there?
I think it really, and I've had conversations with a number of people about this, I think it really is one of the best high-end dining experiences that we've ever had, and we enjoy that sort of thing. And we also kind of like to try new things, and I think both have fairly broad palates. And actually, as I think back on this cruise, we did Remy dinner, and we also did Remy brunch for the first time, which was a little bit different experience. But the thing about Remy is that I think sometimes people are scared that it's going to be weird food, or it's a little too pretentious, or that sort of thing. And it's true that you get dressed up and it seems like a fairly formal experience, but all the folks that we've come into contact with at that restaurant have just been wonderful, and they really do bend over backwards to make sure that you enjoy the experience. And I've had a couple of times where they bring something out, either for my wife or myself, and we taste it and decide, we really don't like this. And they're just whisk away it goes, and they're happy to bring you something else, and they really just want you to enjoy the experience. It's obviously not something that you want to do every night of the cruise, because you would probably die of overeating, plus the fact that it's fairly expensive. But and the other thing is that it's a fairly leisurely experience. So if you're going to be doing dinner at Remy, you're probably not going to be doing anything else that evening, because it's going to be several hours. And I think if you really take your time to enjoy the experience, it's at least a 3-hour meal for dinner. But it really is just an experience that can't be beat. And I was thinking about this. We've had dinner at Remy now, I think, 7 times over the years. And we've also had dinner at Victoria and Albert's at Walt Disney World at least 3 times. And my honest opinion is I think Remy's better.
Really?
I think the quality of food is a little bit better, and the service is as good, if not better.
Yeah, and I think people are definitely intimidated by, the thought of, being dressed up and going to someplace where they may not. And they do offer, if you really want to have the experience, but you really are nervous with the food, they do have some basic dishes as well, right, that they can serve people?
They do, and they have, from what I understand, wonderful options for vegetarians. I've talked to a couple of people who are vegetarian and said they just made me some of the best stuff I've ever eaten, and I'm sure they could do the same thing with other dietary restrictions as well.
Perfect. Well, let's talk about the Remy brunch then. What was different about that versus, say, Palo, I guess, or the dinner at Remy? Yeah,
so Remy dinner has a number of choices, and you have all different things that you can choose from. Brunch is more of a fixed menu experience. And so they have, I think it's 5 courses. Again, they will substitute things. They will bring you something different if you don't like something on the menu, but it's much more of a fixed experience. The other thing is that the Remy brunch is almost as much about champagne as it is about the food. And so rather than having individual tables with individual dining times, they sort of group them together. And it starts out with 8 or 10 people in the wine room, and the sommelier comes in and talks about, they start you off with a glass of champagne and some light appetizers. Sommelier comes in and talks about how each of the courses has been specifically paired with a different type of champagne. Whether or not you want to purchase the champagne pairings is optional, but they do spend some time talking about that. And then at that point, they split people off into their individual tables. And again, they go through the courses. And if you'd like to have the champagne pairing, you can have that as well. What my wife and I ended up doing was just getting one pairing and sort of sharing it because we weren't sure we wanted quite that much champagne. And I have to tell you, I'm not a big champagne drinker, but the things that they served us were really wonderful, and we really enjoyed that piece of it as well.
Yeah, it's amazing when you you have those experiences where they pair wine or different drinks with the food and how well it really blends together. So that would be kind of an amazing experience. Is that something you think you'll do again?
I think so. I think we still, in the end, if we had to choose one versus the other, are probably more fans of Palo Brunch. But that's just because the Palo Brunch has so many wonderful choices, and you really can't go wrong with that one.
Well, looking at your cruise then, so you guys are this cruise, and really they were kind of similar itineraries. You leave from Port Canaveral, you have 2 days at sea, and sorry that the dinners didn't work out so well. Was there anything else that you guys like to do while you're at sea, while you're on board, like the Fantasy or the Dream class ships?
Yeah, I think there's the other big thing that's different with the larger ships from the smaller ships is Satellite Falls, which is the separate adults-only area that's up on one of the top decks. So they have the cove area, Quiet Cove, which is the same on the smaller ships and the larger ships, but then they have an additional adults-only area that has loungers both out in the sun and shaded. It has what's basically a wading pool sort of thing where you can sort of sit and dangle your legs, or you could get in if you wanted to with a fountain. And it's just a really nice place to go up and spend some time. And so for those folks that are either not traveling with kids or have their kids in the kids clubs, it's kind of an additional adult space that is available during the day.
Like in the magic and the wonder that when we've been on it the last 2 times, and once again, for those who don't know, I've never actually been on or our family has not been on the larger ships yet. But by the adult pool, a lot of times in the afternoon they'll have a guitar player out. I've seen lately where they're have some live music. Do they do anything like that up at Satellite Falls, or is it big enough to do something like that?
It's because it's actually much bigger than the Quiet Cove area. What we saw on our cruises is that they usually had that down in the Quiet Cove area,
okay,
and not so much up at Satellite Falls. And just like down in the Quiet Cove area, there's a bar right next to the Satellite Falls area. So for people who want to get drinks during the day, it's pretty easy to do that as well. You don't have to go to another deck or anything like that.
Okay. Anything else you guys like to do while you're on board the ships while you're at sea? Do you do the spa or anything like that? Or
we have in the past, and actually on the second cruise, my wife decided that she needed a spa morning, so she did that, and I think I was either sleeping in or working out or something like that while she did that, and she had a really nice experience with that. We also just kind of like to wander around the ship and look at all the different things that they have. One of the things I try to steer away from is the Fantasy is the ship that actually has a Tiffany's on board.
Uh-huh.
And that can be dangerous, I suspect. But that is there. We like to look at the galleries. The other thing that we've really enjoyed doing is just looking at all the artwork around the ship. And if you sort of go from deck to deck, you can see either animation cells or reproductions from various Disney shorts and films over the years. And the one thing we discovered this time, and I don't think we'd seen it before, it just happened to be the location where our stateroom was, is on the Fantasy, they actually on a couple of decks have some photographs of them building the ship at the Meyer shipyard. And so it starts with just seeing kind of the outline of the keel. They have some photos of basically before the halves of the ship get put together. And so you can sort of look into all the little areas and see what they look like. And that was really interesting. We enjoyed sort of taking a look at those. But a lot of times on the sea days, we just kind of like to sit outside and not pay attention to anything other than the water going by and the breeze and just trying to relax.
Yeah, you can kind of relax or that time to relax from all the stress of working.
That's right.
Have you guys ever done the Art of the Theme Show tour by any chance on board the Fantasy or the Dream? One of the
I know that we've done it. I can't remember which ship we did it on. It's a really nice tour. It goes. I just remember when we did it, they showed you all sorts of interesting things that you might not have noticed, from little patterns on the carpets that you might not have paid attention to just some other sort of things that the Imagineers put around the ship that were interesting. So I think that's an interesting tour to do.
That's on my bucket list to do. I really enjoyed the one that I did on the Wonder, so I'm hoping we do the Fantasy. Hopefully it's going to work out. It didn't quite work out on the Magic this last time, but well, let's talk about the ports then. We know that the hurricanes came through, and I'm totally drawing a blank now. It was last year about this time in the fall, right?
Yeah, I think it was in either September or October of last year, and St. Martin took a direct hit. And I feel bad for the folks, because a lot of the stuff that contributes to the economy was devastated. A number of the oceanfront resorts there still have not reopened. And some of them, you can tell, they still haven't even looked at starting to rebuild them yet. And so I think there really is a need for hopefully them to have a safe time this year and not have another storm come through, because they've got still a lot of rebuilding to do. But the first time that we were there, we took an excursion that was supposed to go to some great snorkeling spots and to a beach. And it turned out that even those places still were not in the best of shape. The beach still had a good bit of erosion. The snorkeling spots that we were able to go to were really pretty limited. And so I think it was one of those situations where they're trying to get as many folks to come as they can, and I understand that. And it wasn't that they weren't a great group of people, and we really enjoyed all the people that we interacted with. So the second time we went to St. Martin, we decided we're just going to sort of wander around and see how things look and what's going on. And so we were able to sort of walk around and talk to some people and again, really get a sense for how devastating those storms were. But the other thing that we did was we discovered off in the corner one of the strangest things that I've ever seen on a Caribbean cruise, which is a store that's called That Yoda Guy.
Really?
And it's funny, we were talking about Star Wars. So what this is in St. Martin. It's a guy who was basically a special effects person on the Star Wars movies, and particularly was one of the men primarily responsible for building Yoda, and has done a lot of work in movies since then, Terminator and some other things. And the story he tells is that at a certain point in his life, he just got tired of that, sold everything he owned, got a boat, and moved to St. Martin. But what he did when he got there was he opened a store and museum. And he actually, if you're a Star Wars fan, has a lot of really cool stuff in there. He has script pages from original drafts of Star Wars. He has other props and things, some real, some replicated. He has a few full-size replicas of things, like he's got a full-size mock-up of the Emperor. He's got a full-size Han Solo in carbonite. He's obviously got a full-size Yoda and things from other movies he's worked on as well. And that was actually really a lot of fun. I think if you have people that are interested either in Star Wars or in special effects and movie making, as part of the museum, he has a number of videos that play as you go through. They're actually taken from when they were making these things and interviews with people that were working on the films, etc. So that was actually a lot of fun.
Wow. How did you guys just stumbled on it? Is that right near downtown where you get off from the ship, or how would people find this?
It is. And it's funny because we had heard about it on the cruise that we went on in May. And so we decided we're going to figure out where this thing is. And then it turns out we hadn't even actually paid attention to it. But on the port shopping map that they give out on the ship, it's like the last thing in the corner. They don't really push it. They don't really advertise it very highly, but it is on there. And so, it wasn't hard to find at all. It's like a block off the beach. It was pretty easy to get to. And it really was a lot of fun.
Well, that's pretty cool. And especially, but you was the cruise before where you guys saw Solo, but still kind of with that Star Wars thought.
Right.
Yeah, it's kind of neat to be able to find a place like that and experience that. So did he do some of the puppetry too, or was he just more the special effects around Yoda?
I think he was more of the building as opposed to actually working the puppets once they were built. I think the folks that were working the puppets were actually Jim Henson and some of the other Muppet folks that were doing that.
I just saw a video where it was about four guys from the Muppets talking Muppets. I think it's like called Four Guys Talking Muppets. Have you seen that? I don't know if you're a Muppet fan at all, but
I am, but I don't think I've seen that.
It's a documentary that you can buy online, but if you Google, like 4 guys talking Muppets, or just Google guys talking Muppets. It'll come up, and it was a really if anybody out there's a Muppet fan, it was definitely well worth. And the money goes to support a charity, I believe. So it was. Oh, it was kind of neat. Okay, so these cruises, do they normally go to St. Martin, or normally it's Tortola, right?
Normally it's Tortola, but apparently the hurricane damage in Tortola is even worse in terms of them not being ready for ships to come in yet. I think Disney's scheduled to go back sometime in the fall, but again, I think it's going to be a matter of waiting to see whether they're actually ready or not.
Okay. Well, then how about your time in St. Thomas? So you guys went to St. Martin, St. Thomas both time. What did you guys, I know your wife's a big snorkeler, and what did you guys do there?
Yeah, St. Thomas is actually really one of our favorite ports because it really has some of the nicest snorkeling around. And we did 2 different snorkeling excursions to 2 different places on the 2 different cruises, and really had a great time. Saw lots of fish, saw some turtles, saw a shark on one of them. It was really kind of neat stuff. The second one was a little bit of a dangerous excursion because it was an open bar on the way back.
Oh no!
So there are probably some things that happened later that afternoon that I don't remember very clearly because of that. It was sure a lot of fun, but they don't let you drink anything until after you're done snorkeling, so they're careful about that sort of thing.
Yeah, smart there. Do you guys normally book your excursion? No, since you've been to St. Thomas a lot, do you book something? Do you have a go-to excursion that you go to, or do you book it through Disney, or what do you guys normally do?
We usually book them through Disney, and we just sort of look at the list of different things and say, okay, we haven't done this one before. Let's try this. This sounds interesting. In this case, where we were traveling with friends, we sort of talked to them about, well, what is it that you'd like to do? And we'll just sort of come along on whatever that is. And it was the friends of ours on the second cruise that apparently had been on the open bar excursion and said, we definitely have to do this one. So, okay, that's fine.
Twist my arm. Huh?
Yeah.
How about, okay, so it's the U.S. Virgin Islands and the British Virgin Islands for people who've never been down there before. If they decide to buy anything on the islands, I'm assuming that dollars work, or obviously, your
dollars work. So actually, St. Martin is half Dutch, half French.
Okay.
And the side where the cruise ship docks is the Dutch side, but everybody pretty much speaks English and takes dollars, and so it really wasn't much of a problem at all. In fact, the prices on, after we did the Yoda store, we went down to the beach and found a little restaurant there and had some jerk chicken and some beer and those kinds of things, and the prices on the menu are in dollars. I think most of what they get is cruisers from the U.S., and so they're pretty accommodating with that.
Perfect. Well, I originally thought that we'd kind of break these up into 2 different talkings with the ship, and we're kind of going back and forth. But so let's get back on the ship. You get another day at sea before you get to Castaway Cay, and maybe let's talk about the differences between that first sailing and the July sailing, and how it was quite a bit different as far as your experience with it through the food and just kind of your experience on the ship.
Yeah, the other thing on the July sailing that somehow happened was there were all these movies that we wanted to see. And so we actually, on the July sailing, ended up seeing 4 different movies. We saw Infinity War, which we had seen before. Ant-Man and the Wasp premiered on that cruise, so we got to see that. We went and saw Solo again, just for kicks. And Incredibles 2 had actually just premiered a couple of weeks before, so we were able to see that one as well. So that one was actually a pretty, as opposed to the first cruise, which was kind of the trivia cruise, this was kind of the movie cruise.
And what did you think of Incredibles 2?
We really liked it. We almost didn't get to see it because the first showing that we went to was on one of the sea days, and we showed up about 20 minutes before the show started, and the theater was already full. So fortunately, that was kind of earlier in the cruise, so we were able to have another opportunity to see it later in the cruise. But I think that's probably the most popular of any movie I've seen, and I think it's because it's for the whole family, really, so kids and everybody would enjoy that.
Right. Was that in the Buena Vista Theater?
They actually ran it in both theaters.
Okay.
That's how popular it was.
Yeah, when we were
even though it wasn't a new release, it was still, again, really popular.
They had it in the Walt Disney Theater when we were on the Magic just recently, and I thought it was a really fun. I liked those type of Pixar movies, I guess. So I really enjoyed it.
We do too.
Yeah. Hey, you know what was kind of weird was somebody made this comment, and if you go back, and I can't wait till it comes, I guess, out on DVD or when we can watch it again, is that if you go back and watch the original one, how much Pixar has changed as far as how much clearer everything is, and you don't really notice it as because it's kind of subtle as the years go by. But when you go back and look at some of the original ones, it really is a little bit different. So does that make sense what I'm saying?
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would imagine that's true. I mean, digital technology really has advanced a lot.
Yeah.
So that wouldn't surprise me. And I actually have, we have the Incredibles Blu-ray, and I haven't stuck it in a while. It'd be interesting to look at that and see.
Yeah, when we got back off the cruise, we popped it in and watched it. And it was definitely, you could definitely see it, but it's still a great movie, so I love it. So
the other thing that people just might be interested in is we were talking with some of the technical crew, and one of the things that they told us is they said, if you have a choice in terms of seeing a movie, it's better to see it in the movie theater than in the big Walt Disney Theater. And they say that's because the sound system in there is really optimized for movies, where they do the best they can with the sound system in the Walt Disney Theater. And it's still a good experience, but they say it's not really as optimized. They do the best they can, but it's still not like being in a movie theater that's set up for movies.
That's good to know. Anything else that you guys did that kind of stood out on that second cruise that really kind of put a smile on your guys' face?
Well, the biggest thing was we got a cabana on Serenity Bay on Castaway Cay.
Oh, wow.
Which was just, I could not believe it because, again, as I said, it was like 5 weeks before the cruise when we booked this thing. And I'm sort of an online stalker, so, I'll have 5 minutes free at work and I'll just log on to the Disney site and see what's available. And one popped up about 3 weeks before the cruise and I grabbed it. And so the four of us being on the cruise, it was really fantastic. It's definitely pricey, and it's definitely not something I would do on every cruise. And I don't know that I would do it if it was just my wife and I, but with the four of us. And it was a beautiful day, just perfect weather. And it was just really a great experience and really a way to top off the cruise.
So let's talk about Castaway Cay then a little bit.
Sure.
And we'll come back to the cabana. What are some of the things that you guys like to do while you're on shore at Castaway Cay?
So I'm a runner, so I usually run the 5K. I drew the line with the July trip, though, because it was just too hot and humid. And with the Eastern Caribbean, it's a race to get back to Castaway Cay. And if you're off the ship at 9:30, you're lucky. And usually it's a little bit later than that. And by that point in the day, there was just no chance that I was going to be out there doing that 5K, even though I live in Florida and run around here all the time. I mean, when I run here in Florida, I'm out there 6 in the morning, 7 the latest, almost before the sun comes up in the summertime. I did do the 5K in May, and that was fine, and that was a lot of fun. We, again, like the snorkeling lagoon, and one of the things that we've seen over the last few years is Disney's really making an effort to make that a better experience. I can remember years ago, the first time we went there, we went out there and snorkeled around and looked around, and there really weren't a lot of fish. And every time that we've gone, it seems there's more and more fish. They put more and more things down to try to encourage more coral growth, and really was a lot of fun. We've seen sea turtles there. This time in July, we actually saw stingrays in addition to all the fish. And the other thing is that, as I think and maybe many of your listeners know, they've sunk a lot of interesting things out there. So there's an old submarine from the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea ride at Disney World. There's a Mickey statue, a Minnie statue, and kind of other interesting things to look at as well.
Yeah, those are kind of neat. I saw a lot of people struggling. I've only been there once, but a lot of people kind of stopped because it was fairly shallow the day we were there, for that first part. And a lot of people didn't make it past there. But once you get past, it was almost like, is it grass that grows there?
There are some areas that grow grass in the shallow areas, and then further on is where they put more of the things. Oh, there's no doubt you have to be a reasonably good swimmer to get out to some of the stuff that's interesting to see. So that does make it a little bit more difficult for some.
Yeah, and I felt kind of bad because I think if people would have kept coming a little bit further, all that opened up where it got deeper, and then you got some great, you got to see the submarine and everything else. And so if it's your first time there, make sure you get past that grass and get to the little deeper area. So there's a lot more to see out there.
And the other thing that they've done, which is helpful, is they've put buoys around some of the interesting things. So if you look out and you see like a red balloon floating in the water, what that probably means is there's something interesting under that. So head for that.
Oh, there's a good tip right there. With the cabana, you get a fridge there. I think they stock it with some drinks and stuff. What all comes with the cabana then that you had?
Right. So the cabana has a covered area with a ceiling fan and an outdoor area that's sort of open to the sun. It has all sorts of padded chairs and couches and loungers that are very comfortable. There is a refrigerator that's stocked with water and sodas. They also put a bowl of fruit there. There's a basket of potato chips and granola bars. So there's all that snack stuff. It has a safe so that if you have things that you want to leave and lock up while you're off doing other things, you can lock things up there. It has its own supply of towels, so you don't have to grab towels and bring them out there from the ship. Also in the refrigerator, it has a little tray of cold, wet washcloths. So if you come back from being out in the heat, you can just grab one of those and put it on your head and get cooled off pretty quickly. It also has its own hammock, so you have that available. And it comes with floats and toys and snorkel equipment, so you don't have to rent all those separately. It also comes with, although you have to go get this, a free bike rental if you're interested in doing that. And we've done that before, where you can sort of bike around Castaway Cay and see all the different things. And then the other piece really is just sort of a private area. And so you've basically got your own space there. There is... For the adult beach, there are 4 cabanas, and there's one attendant for those 4. And so there's a button in your cabana that you push, and here he comes on his golf cart, and he will give you a ride to the bathrooms or off to lunch. He will get drinks for you, anything else that you need. And I got to say, absolutely the best part, these are wonderful people and really work hard. But at the end of the day, they will pick you up in the little golf cart and take you all the way back to the gangway onto the ship.
Oh, wow.
And so you, after a long day, you don't have to go through the little line that everybody else goes through or any of that stuff. He just takes you right up to the foot of the gangway, and there you go. And that's, at the end of the day, that was like, this is just the icing on the cake.
That's probably almost worth the price right there, right?
Oh, it's closed at that point.
Well, that's good to know that maybe they pop up, because I've always heard that it's just so hard to, if you're not concierge or whatnot, it's just so hard to get those cabanas. So it's good to know that maybe if you keep looking, maybe you might be able to find one.
Yeah. The other time I've seen them, and I've heard other people say the same thing, is if you look at the ability to book things online. They say booking closes on such and such a date, and it's usually, I think, 3 days before the sale date. And apparently the time to get on is the evening that booking closes, because at that point, people may decide, well, maybe I really don't want this, and that's when they release it. They've been holding on to it for weeks or months, and then they make the decision that they don't want it. And I've had people tell me excursions that were sold out pop up then, cabanas pop up then, etc.
Okay. What are your thoughts about, the cruises as they end? A lot of times you get Castaway Cay and boom, you're at Port Canaveral the next day. Would you rather have another day at sea? And obviously coming from the Eastern, it'd probably be pretty tough to make that work just because of the distance. But any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So we've done that when the Dream does its 4-night cruise, it generally does Nassau, Castaway Cay, and then a sea day. And that is nice to have that there and to sort of have that day to just sort of relax, unwind. It's generally not too bad for us coming back the next day because, again, we just hop in the car and we're home in a couple hours. So it's not a big deal. But I can imagine that you've got people that are sort of worn out from a day on Castaway Cay and all the activities and everything, and then they have to deal with going to the airport and all the other kinds of things that they have to do to get home. And I can see where it'd be nice to have that sea day there sort of in between to buffer that.
Yeah, it's tough to be on Castaway Cay and totally just relax because there are so many fun things to do. Since you guys have been on so many different cruises, do you have any tips that kind of stand out that you think of when you're booking a cruise in the Caribbean that you guys kind of look for? Just in general, anything that stands out that you can think of for maybe some first-time cruisers that are looking at doing a Disney cruise?
No, I think probably one of the main things for people, especially if they think this might not be someplace they ever go back to again, is to sort of do a little research about the islands, because in some ways they sort of all look the same because they're these rocks in the middle of the ocean with mountains and beaches and things like that. But I think every one of the islands has sort of its own little character to it and its own little quirks about it. It's like, again, who would imagine you'd find a Star Wars store on an island in the Caribbean?
Yeah.
And just sort of researching what's out there, because unfortunately what I think happens sometimes is people will look at what the folks give out on the cruise ship, and they're not lying about this. I mean, it's printed right on the map of the port. These businesses have paid a fee to be featured here. Mm-hmm. But there's probably all sorts of other places, like, as I mentioned, we went to a little place for jerk chicken and all on the beach in St. Martin. And I actually found that just by doing some research. I think I found it on TripAdvisor before we went on the cruise, because I was thinking, we'd like to find an interesting place to eat. And so there's lots of other things that are out there on these islands that you may not hear about. And again, it's not because the cruise line is trying to deceive anybody. They're trying to provide a good experience for people and provide some advice for folks. But there's a lot of other stuff out there too. And there may be things that for people or for their families, they might enjoy more than perhaps what sort of the official things are.
That's a good point. So do you like TripAdvisor? Is that a spot that you like, or do you have any other resources you use?
I tend to use that one a lot. I mean, there are some others. It sort of depends. I'm not sure. Sometimes Yelp seems to have useful things. Sometimes TripAdvisor seems to have useful things. I've seen sort of other random things pop up. There's other sort of travel sites that you sometimes see. I've found things on occasion that show up, like in the New York Times travel pages. We'll talk about something in particular and different things that are interesting at a particular location, that sort of thing. So I think it's one of those things where you just sort of hunt around and see what you can find. Obviously, take things with a grain of salt. But my sense is that if a lot of people say the same thing about something, then it's probably some truth to that.
Yeah, I use TripAdvisor quite a bit. And kind of like you, kind of like if you go to Amazon and you read some of the reviews, I don't put a lot of faith into just one or two reviews, but if you, like you said, if it's something's got, several thousand, they're all trending to be good or bad, it's probably, they're probably spot on.
Right.
Yeah. So.
And then the other big thing for the Caribbean cruises, and I think you had someone speak with you about this on an earlier show, is hurricane season is real. And so there's always the chance that if you cruise during that time, that might somehow interfere with your trip. And I think that's one of the reasons why some of the cruises are less expensive during that time. I think actually September is probably one of the least expensive times for cruises. Some of that is because the kids are just back in school, but I think some of that is also because it's hurricane season and you just never know what's going to happen. I never worry that it's dangerous because the ships are really good about avoiding weather of all sorts, and I don't think that there'll be a situation where they'll put you in danger. But it may be a situation where there was a port that you were looking forward to that you can't get to, or that your cruise is cut short. I think that happened last year, at least to one of the cruises, where they ended up having to come back a day early because of where the storm was.
Yeah, I remember I talked to somebody that happened to, and I think that they gave them money for those days they missed towards a follow-on cruise. So It sounds like they try and make the best of it for you, but unfortunately, like you said, with the weather, it's unpredictable at that time, and there's not much that they can do, really, besides keep you safe.
Yeah. And then the other thing that sometimes comes up that I hear people talk about is, well, certain months of the year, the water at Castaway Cay is too cold. And maybe it's just me, but I've been to Castaway Cay in January, I've been to Castaway Cay in July, and I went in the water both times without much issue as far as I'm concerned. But if it's someone who's sort of sensitive and really wants their beach water to be very warm, then it doesn't get cold in the Bahamas in that area during the winter months, but the water does cool off a little bit. So, if you're someone who's used to colder waters, it probably isn't going to bother you at all. But if you're looking for the real warm water of the Caribbean, at least at Castaway Cay, you don't really have that quite as much in the wintertime. As you get further south in the Caribbean, it sort of evens out, and it's pretty much the same year round.
Well, anything in disembarkation on either one of these two that you want to talk about, Frank, or anything stand out?
Actually went pretty smoothly on both of our cruises. We're generally carry all our stuff off with us people because it's just my wife and I. So that makes life a little bit easier. I know that sometimes people who have a lot of luggage are scrambling because if you have luggage that you want them, the porters to take off, you have to have that packed up the night before and ready to go. And I will just give the same tip that Disney gives and everybody else gives, but it happens to somebody every time. Make sure that you don't pack the clothes you need to wear the next day because then you're going to be going off the ship in your pajamas or whatever it is that you wear to bed. But generally, we just pack our stuff up. We tend to not be fans of the sit-down breakfast at your assigned restaurant. We generally go to breakfast at Cabanas. And that's one of the things that they don't advertise. It's not in any of the navigators. They don't tell you that breakfast is available in Cabanas on that last day, but it is. And the reason we like that is you can go anytime you want to go. They serve until I think about 8:30. And so if you're not enamored of your set dining time, it's easier to do that. So what we'll generally do is we'll have all our stuff packed up. We'll go get breakfast around 7:30. And then they ask that you be out of your staterooms by 8 o'clock. And then we just swing back down to our stateroom a little before 8, grab our stuff and go. And Port Canaveral is pretty seamless in terms of getting off the ship. It's just sort of a walk through the terminal. The really depressing part where they check you out for the last time with your key to the world card, and then your cruise is really officially over. And then they have all the transportation options just right there as you get out of the building. So for people who need taxis or want to call an Uber, or if they're adding on to their trip going to Walt Disney World, that's there. If the buses are going to the airport, that's there. And then obviously, if you parked your car, that's right there as well.
And back up north you go.
Yeah, back to reality.
Yeah, I know it's always a sad time, isn't it, when you have to check out that last time?
The only thing that actually works out okay for the fantasy cruises is they all end on a Saturday, so at least for most people, you don't have to go to work the next day. So
there you go.
You do have a day to decompress at that
point. Well, what's next on your guys' schedule? What do you guys have coming up? Something doesn't pop up between now and then?
Yeah, so we actually have a couple of cruises that we booked a year plus ago. So, we usually have 2 or 3 of those a year. We're going to be on the Dream in October, and that's going to be a little combo trip. So we're using some of our DVC points and going to Walt Disney World for a few days. We're going to do Food and Wine Festival, Mickey's Not So Scary, and also zip over to Universal for Halloween Horror Nights. And then we're getting on the Dream for a Monday through Friday 4-day cruise at that point. So that's our next trip that we've got coming up in October.
Is that a Halloween on the high seas sailing by any chance?
It is a Halloween on the high seas sailing. And we've been on one of those before and had a good time with that. So looking forward to that. Can
I twist your arm and have you come back on after
sure.
you get back from that? Because I'd love to talk about Halloween during Halloween.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. And that one, again, is one of the Dream 4-night cruises. So that's, again, a different ship than we were on our last couple of cruises.
Perfect.
And then in January, we're actually doing a back-to-back. So, and this is the first time we've done that. We're doing on the Wonder, the Galveston to San Juan repositioning cruise, and then the San Juan Southern Caribbean cruise that comes right after that. So that's kind of one that we've been looking forward to for a long time.
Well, that'll be a lot of fun. And like you said, that's your first time out of Galveston. It'll be neat to hear what your thoughts are about leaving out of there. And
have never been to San Juan before, so it's interesting. We've talked to people who've done back-to-backs, and they say, yeah, you can just get off and get right back on the ship. But we're not going to do that. We're going to go explore San Juan for a while because, having never been there before, we wanted to take that opportunity to see some of the city.
Is it easy to book the same cabin? Or did you book the same cabin then on the back-to-back so that you just leave your stuff there, or how does that work? Do you?
We did, and Disney will do that if it's available. We actually booked those opening day, and like I said, that one's been booked for like a year and a half. We knew that we wanted to do that, and so we were able to get the same stateroom for both, so we don't have to pack up. But we've talked to folks who've done back-to-back cruises before, and they said if you're in a different cabin, you do have to pack up some of your things, but they'll move all your stuff for you. And they actually tell you if you've got clothes on the hangers in the closet, don't bother, we'll just move them. So at least you don't have to pack up that part of it.
Oh, that's great. Well, I guess as we finish up today, is there anything else that we've missed out on that you wanted to bring up as we were talking about the Caribbean today, Frank?
I don't think so. I think it's, as you said, it's a big part of what Disney does, and they have cruises to a number of different places. And we've done both the Eastern and the Western Caribbean cruises, and they go to different destinations, and I think they all have things that are worth seeing. So people should definitely look into those and see whether that's something that might appeal to them.
Definitely. I guess one last quick question. Western versus Eastern, more ports, stops on the Western versus the Eastern itinerary. Would you have any advice on that? Unless somebody's really dying to go to the Eastern, would it maybe better to go Western first?
I think it depends on what you think you're going to enjoy and the different things at the different ports. I think there's actually some different options on the Western. For example, one of the stops on the Western is Cozumel, and there are all sorts of different port adventures that are available on that. So there's excursions to Mayan ruins and all sorts of other things that you might not be able to get on the Eastern. On the other hand, if you're interested in beaches and water and things like that, I think the ones on the Eastern Caribbean are actually better in terms of the snorkeling and those sorts of things. So I think it's just a matter of looking at not only what you think you might be interested in, but you can actually go on the Disney website and see all the port adventures that they have available for each different port. And again, do some research online as well to what all the activities are. It's always a little bit of a tug of war between my wife and I, because my wife likes port days better and I like sea days better. So we end up sort of meeting somewhere in the middle. And so the back-to-back that we're doing is really pretty interesting, because the repositioning cruise has only one port. It has 4 sea days. So it's like, this is my vacation.
Oh, yeah.
And then the Southern Caribbean cruise actually only has 1 sea day and has 4 port days. So she's really looking forward to that part of it. So.
Well, it sounds like a win-win there, huh?
I think so.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Frank, for coming on. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day with all your knowledge and being able to share it with our listeners throughout the Caribbean.
You're welcome. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Well, have fun in October when you guys head down to Disney World, and I look forward to talking to you when you get back from your trip on the Dream.
Sounds great. Thank you, Steve.
All right. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon, Frank.
Okay. Thanks.
Bye. Well, that's going to wrap up our show today. Once again, I want to thank Frank for coming back on and sharing his and his wife's experiences. They cruised not on 1, but 2 different cruises on the Disney Fantasy, and it was nice to kind of turn our attention back towards the Caribbean after a long summer where we've been talking about Alaska and a lot of Europe. And not to be outdone, we do have another Alaska show coming up. I can't wait to bring that to you. And also a real cool Northern European trip with some ABD add-ons that we're going to be recording this week as well, and we'll be having that out to you soon. But with the holidays coming up, and I can't believe it, I was actually down in Walt Disney World on a layover, and I'm actually recording the ending here as we get ready to head back to the West Coast. And they've already had Mickey's Not So Scary going on here at Walt Disney World for almost a month. That's kind of crazy, isn't it? But with the holidays approaching, we've got a couple different holiday cruises, a couple listeners going out on holiday cruises, and we're going to bring those to you as well. So all of us here at the DCL Podcast would like to thank you always for coming back and taking a listen. If you are heading out on a trip and would like to come on and share your experiences, please contact me at the DCL Podcast on Facebook. That's Steve at DCL Podcast on Facebook, or Christy as well at packyourpixiedust.com. or Pack Your Pixie Dust on Facebook or Twitter, and we will line you up and get you on the show. It's our pleasure to bring you on. It keeps the conversation going and helps all of us learn to maybe be a little bit better on our next Disney cruise. You know, we can always use those tips and experiences from others to make our next vacation just a little bit more memorable. So between now and the next show, if you know somebody who would enjoy our show, we sure would appreciate it if you would pass it on. In addition, if you'd like to go over to iTunes and leave us a review, we could always use that as well. It helps us become a little bit more known in the cruising community and the Disney community as well for podcasting. So between now and our next show, if you are heading out on your next cruise or next trip, all of us here at the DCL Podcast would like to wish you fair winds and safe travels as you head out on your next adventure. Once again, thanks for coming back and taking a listen, and we'll see you next time on the DCL Podcast.